is like the list of stuff.
Mayor, the meeting is yours.
Oh,
You're ready to go.
thank you, Antonio.
You're welcome.
Well, I guess it's time to welcome everyone to the Vinton Town Council meeting for this Tuesday evening, March 21st. And we will start with the roll call, please.
Councilmember Lyles.
Here.
Councilmember McCarty.
Here.
Councilmember Mullins. Here. Vice Mayor Stovall.
Here.
Mayor Gross.
Here. Thank you. As always, we will have our moment of silence. I hope you use this time to pray. I certainly will. If you pray, please keep this country and this community in your thoughts and prayers. And also, while we're standing, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance, and Councilmember Lyles is in charge of that. What are we going to do this evening?
Well, since there's some, I guess I'll do it.
Do you remember?
Just say the word I. We'll get you, letter I. We'll get you from there.
We got you covered, right? You'll stand for that, please.
Please face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, folks. I would just like to briefly remind everyone of our guidelines for attending the council meeting. They are always available at the door along with the agenda. I think we're all home folks today, but if anyone ever attends, we certainly will use our guidelines. So upcoming events, Councilmember McCarty, what you got there?
I do. I have several here. April the 1st is the Farmers Market, opens from 9 to 1. And for more information, you can email Cloveland at Vinton VA or Chastity, and they will give you the rundown of events for the Farmers Market. Exciting time. I always like to go down there.
You bet.
April the 1st is Clean Valley Day, and everyone will meet at Lake Drive Plaza, Kroger's parking lot at 9 a.m., and it'll be from 9 to 12 to help pick up trash in our area. Because we have so many different activities going on in the area, we've decided to change up the way that we announce everything that's going on in the area, and we encourage folks to visit one of the many restaurants and entertainment venues in our community, such as Rosie's, Lancerlot, Twin Creeks, Vinton Bowling, and Defy Gravity, just to name a few. More information can be found at each venue's websites or social media. And for more information on everything happening in Vinton, please visit the In Vinton Facebook page, and don't forget to like and share that. So,
All right.
lots of stuff going on.
Thank you. There certainly is. Always a lot of information on the Facebook page and the website as well. So thank you for that. All right. And with that, let's talk about what the council members have been doing recently. And by the way, we didn't have a meeting last time, so we got a long list.
Right, so it's a longer list this time.
Yeah.
Since the last council meeting, which was February 21st, the mayor and myself attended the ribbon cutting at Salon 121 on Jefferson. On February 28th, Vice Mayor Stovall and Councilmember Lyles attended Business After Hours, hosted by the Vinton Chamber of Commerce at Twin Creeks. March 3rd, the mayor was at the Vinton Vet ribbon cutting. They've expanded. That's their surgical building, is
Yeah.
that correct? Right beside them. On March the 6th, the mayor attended Roanoke County's 200 plan reveal, which was held at the War Memorial. On March 13th, the mayor and Vice Mayor Stovall attended Finance Committee. On March 15th, Councilmember McCarty and I were at the Public Works Committee meeting. On March 16th, all of us were lucky enough to be at Pokey Joe's soft opening, and we had a wonderful time. And on March 18th, the mayor attended the first of the season Vinton Cruise In at the Farmers Market.
Oh, that was fun.
I bet. That's right up your alley. You like that.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
And that's the first of the season. So there's one, what, every month now?
Yes, third Saturday every month.
Perfect.
So, yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a good summer. All right, Mr. Vice Mayor, you have any comments this evening?
I do, Mr. Mayor. I was doing some reading a couple of weeks ago. As you know, since I broke my leg, it's about one of the things I can do. And I came across into the 60s and found an interesting read about Rosa Parks. And Rosa Parks' big initiative for not moving that day, it was told that she was tired from working as a seamstress. She actually wasn't tired, but she felt like that she wasn't free in this country. And that's why she didn't move off of that infamous bus seat ride that day. And after that, she was quoted by many people that she interviewed, and she said, "I would like to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free, so other people would be free also."
Wow.
Yeah. So I
Very
think
nice.
that paved the way for her and for, of course, a lot of people in this country.
No kidding, no kidding. Thank you for that, sir. Okay, as we move on to item G, as we get into the business portion of the agenda, are there any changes or anything to postpone, change? No? Hearing none, we will move on to the consent agenda, and tonight that contains the regular minutes, the minutes of the regular meeting of February 21st, also a resolution to appropriate $10,000 for the Vinton's tree inventory project, very, very important project, and also a resolution for VRS funds for a police vehicle, as well as another VRS funds for police vehicle damage, and a resolution to appropriate funds for the law enforcement summit. Any changes or additions? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion for approval.
I make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
We have a motion to approve by Councilmember Lyles, and a second by Councilmember McCarty. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Don't see anything listed under, Rick, you want to do that now? Okay. We do have something really special under awards and recognitions. There's a very prestigious group known as ICMA, which I think stands for International City County Managers Association. Did we get it? And I understand that there's over 1,400 local government professionals that are part of this organization. But to be fully credentialed, you have to have significant experience as a senior manager in local government, and of course a college degree. And you also have to have demonstrated a commitment to high standards of integrity, as well as a commitment to lifelong learning and professional development. This has been called the gold standard for professional certificates in local government, and it's recognized throughout the country. It's certainly attests to the high level of a high level of preparation, skill, and ethics. So I'm very proud tonight to announce that our town manager, Mr. Pete Peters, has been awarded a credential. It says, and I have a certificate. I'd like for you to come down front here. In recognition of receiving the ICMA Credential Manager designation, we recognize you as an outstanding member of our community and thank you for your leadership. Presented on behalf of the town of Vinton on this 21st day of February. And I would like to add that obviously the ICMA organization thinks a lot of you. I recognize your skill and your ability, but I'd just like to add that I think a lot of you, and I know this council does too. Folks, I'll give you an opportunity to comment if you'd like. But Pete, if you don't mind meeting me down front, maybe Debbie will take our picture here. Matter of fact, can we get here with council? Does that work? Congratulations.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you want us to
Do you want
stand
us or
up?
no?
You want us to stand up?
Yeah. Or hide?
So we can see you guys.
Come on up.
We got one other portion.
Hold on, it's gonna take me a minute. Don't snap the camera.
Can you see? Where's your, I got it.
Here, come on, come this way.
No, I don't care. I'm good. I'm good. Sorry.
Keeping our clothes.
All right, let me do one other one. Thank you.
Yay, congratulations, Pete.
Yay, good job.
Congratulations.
Great job.
Good job.
No doubt, we run away, I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Did have one more thing. So Debbie will get another picture. But, so we tried to orchestrate a surprise for Pete. So luckily, he was away from work all day today, working from home, being with his wife. So otherwise, we wanted her to be here too. But as you know, Pete completed the Senior Executive Institute last summer, and now the Credentialed Manager. Both of those go really hand in hand. And so we, as the leadership team and the administrative staff, wanted to do something to also recognize this. And it's 2 years since you've been sort of the formal town manager. And I have a unfortunate habit of scrolling through Instagram on a regular basis. So Don and I found this piece of artwork that says, "One who has a why can bear any how," and the leadership team and admin staff signed it.
Oh,
How about it?
Oh, that's nice.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate that. That's really awesome. Thank you very much. It means a lot.
Well, it's little for what you do,
It is.
I think. I mean, that's awesome, but
gonna look good in your office.
you keep us on the ball.
He had us read a book on finding your why, or what's your why. So it's really important
Perfect.
for us to emphasize
That's
that.
awesome.
That's cool.
I've read that book.
You guys have any comments? Yeah. You good? Okay. Well, congratulations, Pete.
Thank you, sir.
We appreciate you so much. Yeah. All right. And with that, we'll move on to citizens' comments. I think we're all home folks here, so I guess it's time for our briefing. Jeremy, always good to see you.
Well, Mr. Mayor.
Guy with the best selection of ties in the county.
Keeps giving him a run tonight, though. Look at that.
Yeah.
Don't y'all leave, don't y'all leave Keith out.
Keith, yeah.
Fuchsia, isn't it fuchsia?
I always have to think about my ties as well. Set a standard that I can only hope to keep up with.
Right. Yeah, Keith is
Keith is meeting that standard tonight as well.
the man.
All right. Every few years, we need to go over the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. Before I get into it, I also do want to mention the Conflicts of Interest Act. I know you were recently informed of the need to do the online training for that. I haven't followed up to see who's finished that yet, but if you haven't completed that, go ahead and do so. That's part of the every 2-year training that you need to go.
Yeah, actually, if you would, her and I were talking seriously, because it said that you would receive an email once you submitted it.
Not very good about giving certificates when you.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I thought maybe we'd receive an email saying that, I just want to make sure that it went through, so yeah. You
Yeah,
can check on
because I
that.
did it too, and I haven't seen any more.
Just to be
Same
safe,
here.
make a note, put it in your file that you've attended it on a particular
Okay.
day, and then at least you've got some support for the fact that you went through
Okay.
it if something
Yeah.
gets
Okay.
lost.
Same here, I completed it, but I never did get an email.
Right.
I thought it was my computer.
I'm going to do while I have a lot of slides, it's going to be kind of a tops of the waves overview. Obviously, if anybody has any questions at any time, please don't hesitate to speak up. The Virginia Freedom of Information Act, 2 main components to it. One is public records, access to public records. The second main component is public meetings, holding public meetings. And then with respect to both of those, when do we have exceptions to the assumption that all records are public and all meetings are public? The Virginia Freedom of Information Act, the purpose of the act, as stated in the act itself, is to provide ready access to public records and free entry to meetings of public bodies wherein the business of the people is being conducted. And because of that, the code section states all public records and meetings shall be presumed open. You have to have a justification, an express justification, to be able to either go into a closed meeting or to treat a document or a record as being protected from public disclosure. The code speaks specifically to liberal construction to serve the purposes of open records and open meetings. And along the same lines, the code states that exemptions to open records and open meetings will be narrowly construed. So what is a public record? Well, the answer is pretty much anything, no matter how it is taken down or recorded, that relates to the transaction of business. And that's the key. Does it relate to the transaction of business? If Keith and Sabrina send a text about a sporting event, or send a text to Brad about West Virginia football or something like that, that's not about the transaction of public business. So even though it's a text between two members of council, it's not going to be a public record. But if you're sending texts about tax rates or personnel or economic development projects, that would be a public record. So it's a very common sense standard. What are you communicating, or are you recording a record or creating a record that deals with town business or council business? There are times when your personal records, your notes, your text messages, your emails would be public records. And again, that is when you're talking about town business, when you're talking about the transaction of town business. So you may be using your personal email to send an email. And if you're transacting town business, however, that would be a public record and would be subject to disclosure under FOIA. So there is no protection that you glean or gain by going and using a personal communications device as opposed to a public communications device. And in fact, we encourage you, and this may be in another slide, I encourage you to use the Town of Vinton email that you have when you're communicating. And that's twofold. One, it helps you keep your public communications, your communications about town business in one location. But two, when you get a FOIA request, it's easier to find. You don't have to go through your phone and your text messages. You don't have to go through your personal email and look for things. If you make a practice of using your Town of Vinton email address, you'll be insulating yourself from hopefully having to conduct some laborious search for additional records that you may have difficulty finding, frankly. And there are, and I'll get into this, I'm jumping ahead on some slides here, there are preservation obligations with regard to public records. You can't delete them. So having them on the Town of Vinton server helps you from unintentionally deleting what otherwise would be a public record. In this slide, be aware that your emails and your texts are public records if you're discussing town business, you're transacting town business. And I know that's always a confusing area, but it's, when in doubt, best practice is to assume it's going to be a public record and kind of proceed accordingly. Do not delete. This is what I was referencing before. The Library of Virginia establishes a code of a retention schedule for documents, and the retention schedule can vary from, you can be immediately destroyed to 30 years or keep forever in some circumstances. It is a very intricate list of types of records, personnel records, medical records, records of ordinances, records of other legislative actions, things that need to be retained. You're not expected to know that. I'm just letting you know that there is again, a requirement that you not delete materials within a particular time frame. And so to protect yourself, the safest approach is not to delete anything. If it's on the server will back it up. It'll be there if it's ever needed. So we talk about access to public records. How does the public gain that access to public records? The public gains the access by submitting what we call a FOIA request, and you've all heard that term, Freedom of Information Act request. There's no magic to a FOIA request. An individual comes to you and asks for a record. It can be verbal, and it doesn't have to mention FOIA, but you have to understand and hear that as a Freedom of Information Act request. Somebody comes up to you on the street and says, hey, can you get me a copy of whatever that resolution was you passed the other day regarding the Versa funds for the police car that was damaged? I'd like some more information about that. You know, that's a Freedom of Information Act request. You could probably direct them to the public record, but if they need you to get it for them, you should contact the FOIA officer, and we'll get to that in a second, and ask the FOIA officer to make that information available to the individual making the request. The key takeaway here is it can be verbal. It doesn't have to be in writing, and it doesn't have to mention FOIA. So if you get a request like this, and this applies to staff as well, you need to understand that that triggers your obligation to respond, even if it doesn't use any magic words like Freedom of Information Act or anything like that. And once you get a request, you do have an obligation to respond, even if there are no responsive documents. I have a case, and because FOIA can lead to litigation, where somebody has asked, I would like the policy of the city that allows you to come into my house and steal my child and take him away from me. It was a situation where the child was taken by Child Protective Services. But the guy was mad, and he wanted this policy that said you can come in and take my child without any reason. Well, there is no such policy. But we actually had to write to him and say, there is no such policy, because you have to respond to Freedom of Information Act requests. You have an initial period of 5 business days to respond, and you have an automatic right to extend that response time by 7 additional business days. You just have to write within the initial 5 days and say you're taking advantage of the additional 7 days and explain to them why. Typically, it's because either we've got to look for the documents or we've got to review the documents and make sure there's not information that we need to redact or withhold. Beyond the 7 days, and I've seen some extensive FOIA requests that require more than 12 days to respond. If you're going to go beyond that 12 business day period, you have to work with the requester to get them to agree to the additional time. If they refuse to agree, you have to go to court and ask the court to grant you additional time. Generally, I've never had an issue where I've not been able to work out something with somebody who's requesting records. If they realize how voluminous the records are, they'll allow you the time, by and large, to collect them. Once you get to the point of making a response, there are 4 permissible responses under the Virginia Code. 1, here are all the documents you've asked for. 2, we've looked at your request and we're entirely withholding the request because none of the records are eligible for being disclosed. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why you would not have to disclose records. Remember, there is the presumption that you're going to disclose them, but there are some specific exemptions that apply. 3, if you do withhold records, you have to say, this is roughly the amount of records we're withholding. I recently had a FOIA request that I was dealing with, and what we did was we counted the number of emails and counted the number of attachments to those emails, and basically said, we're withholding all this information. It was economic development materials. And we said, we're withholding all this information. It's roughly 75 emails, 23 attachments, and if you make a PDF out of them, it's about 400 pages. And so that way we were able to give the requester some understanding of the scope of what we were withholding, and that's information you have to give them because that informs them if they want to proceed to court and challenge a decision to withhold certain information. And that applies also with response number 3, which is we're providing the records in part and withholding them in part. Sometimes you'll get requests which will fall into that category where some of the materials can be provided, others are exempt. And then lastly, the 4th response is we don't have these records, they don't exist. I'm moving fast, so if anybody has any questions, let me know. You can charge for responding to FOIA requests. And that's not the case everywhere in the country, but in Virginia, you are allowed to charge. Before you can do so, you have to communicate with the requester. And this is a relatively new change in the law, that you have this affirmative obligation to communicate with them before you begin the search. But you tell them, we think that there's going to be a charge. Do you want us to proceed? They give you the go-ahead. And then you can, and a lot of times requesters will ask for that anyway. So commonly you'll get a thing at the bottom of a request that says, if you think this is going to cost more than $50, please clear it with me first. You can, in addition to telling them that you're going to charge them at the conclusion of the FOIA request, you can actually charge a deposit up front if you believe it's going to cost you more than $200 to fulfill the request. Now, you can only charge for actual cost. There used to be an issue of, you don't generate as much paper anymore when you're responding to FOIA requests. There used to be a big issue when you were making copies about could you charge copies and could you charge 10 cents a page or 20 cents a page? And the answer was no, because that's not your real cost. Your real cost, you have to actually figure out what your cost per page was, and it ended up usually being like a cent and a half or something. But today, now that you usually respond in electronic format, that's not as much as of an issue. But what you can charge for is staff time. You have a staff member who goes and searches for the records, assesses whether or not they're responsive, looks at them to see if there are exemptions, potentially redacts information from them. That process is time consuming. And what you can do is charge the actual cost of that staff person for reviewing those records and providing those records. And candidly, I've seen localities and other public bodies address costs in a number of different issues. Some will charge from penny one, some will allow a cost of up to $50 without charging it, some will not charge for anything. The key is making sure your policy is consistent and you're applying it across all types of requesters. If someone is charged, say we don't require a deposit or it's less than $200, if someone is charged for a FOIA request but does not pay that, then after 30 days you no longer have to comply with their FOIA requests until they make the back payment. So that's in essence the teeth that you have for someone who doesn't pay.
So if you
as
have
directed.
someone that asks you verbally, like you stated earlier,
Yeah. Let me interrupt you real quick, Mike. One thing to know is you have a FOIA officer, and the FOIA officer is identified on the website. You could, in that instance, direct them to the FOIA officer.
Got it.
As a way of
Right.
as opposed to you taking on the obligation of finding the records. But if
and then
that
you can say to
person,
them, as you just stated, then we can say to them, look, this information you're requesting can be cumbersome and could require a fee for us to staff time and.
absolutely, and I think you would want the FOIA officer to be the one to communicate that.
Absolutely.
You would want to refer them to the FOIA officer and then have the FOIA officer. And that's why we have a FOIA officer. It's a clearinghouse. Well, that's the slide. What? The next slide. The role of the FOIA officer. He or she is a clearinghouse for all of this information. They have to go through training as well, so they're going to be knowledgeable of these rules. They're going to know when to pick up the phone and call me and ask questions about specific requests. They are going to know where to look for information, who to talk to try to collect information. And so and they're going to know the obligation to communicate with the requester. And so that's why we've created this FOIA officer, but also to give notice to the outside world of who the primary point of contact is. And we could take the position that you always have to go to the FOIA officer, but I think it would be helpful as, in your roles to steer people in that direction. And obviously that would be useful to the citizens if you'd help them to find out who that is if they don't know, to look on the website, for example. But the FOIA officer is very important. And I mentioned earlier about charging for redacting and things like that. The FOIA officer will be able to review the records and determine if things need to be redacted. And again, reach out for assistance when trying to figure out if certain things are or are not exempt from disclosure. I think I interrupted you, though.
No, you're fine.
Did I get that, Mike?
No,
Okay.
you're on with you.
Okay. Again, some common issues. FOIA liberally construed, I mentioned that before. We must have a specific statute, and there are several in Title 2.2 that allow for withholding documents. We'll talk about some of the specific ones, but you have to identify a specific exclusion in the code if you're going to withhold a document. You do not have to create records. There's a common misconception that FOIA is an avenue for asking questions. It is not that. It is a mechanism for requesting records. So if the record does not exist, the locality doesn't have to answer a series of questions or provide the information that is requested but not contained in a record. Now, what is a record is a little bit different this day and age than it was 20 or 30 years ago, because now everything is in a database. So if it is a simple function of downloading something from a database or printing something from a database, that's not creating a record. That is a record that exists. You couldn't use that as a rationale for not responding. But you would not have to go out and create a new spreadsheet inputting data, for example, with information that you might have, but in a different format. And again, if part of a document is subject to an exclusion, but others, parts of the document are not, you would have to redact. You could, we see a lot of times where you have to redact some personal information, birthdays, social security numbers in some records we have. You also could have a situation where you would have a document that it would have some confidential economic development information, but may have other more general information that, for example, marketing information about the town, for example, that might be in the same document you'd have to disclose. So some of those common exclusions, personnel information. Typically, if there's a FOIA request for information regarding an employee, that is properly withheld, except when the request comes from the subject of the file. Cody can ask for his own personnel file. Cody can't ask for Pete's personnel file in a FOIA request. Work product or legal memoranda from me. If I write an email or a memo to Pete analyzing an issue or giving him some advice on something, that's protected. That would not be, that would be exempt, and you would not have to disclose it. Proprietary information or trade secrets during an economic development project. Ideally, you're in a relationship with a prospect where you have what we call a guarantee or a promise of confidentiality that flows from the town, and because we work with the Roanoke County EDA so much, from them to the prospect, and then based on that promise that we'll keep their information secret, we can withhold as an exemption the information that they've provided, because they may provide us information that deals with with their business models or their customers or how they see their business growing, and that's confidential to them. And so to allow us to pursue those economic development projects without undermining their efforts to keep their information confidential, we're allowed to exempt that from FOIA. Same with negotiating public contracts. We may have negotiating strategies. Again, I could be communicating with Pete, or I could be communicating with Mayor Gross, or Pete could be communicating with the mayor about negotiating points with regard to an economic development project or a procurement situation. And if we're talking about what we're willing to do, are we willing to pay this much? Are we willing to sell the property for that much? Those are negotiating points that we would not have to disclose publicly. And you'll see when we get to meetings, we can go into meetings and talk about those issues as well. And then working papers, that's always an interesting one. That applies to Pete as the town manager, but he's able to keep his working papers confidential as he takes notes from the work he does on a daily basis. I'm going to hit these two quickly. There are come times when there's a FOIA request that may relate to tax information. That's just an area I like to put it on people's radar screen. There are components of public tax information, or of tax information, not public tax information, that it's illegal to disclose. So, for example, businesses and their gross receipts, which lead to their gross receipt taxes, FOIA requests for those you need to be very careful with. You would need to, you have to withhold those, even though there's not really anything expressed in FOIA about it, because Title 58.1 says we can't get that type of information, and we as the governmental entity can't disclose that type of information. So if you get tax requests, Andrew, that's something if somebody comes to you, the FOIA officer says, we got this information about XYZ company, and somebody's done a FOIA request for their gross receipts tax, just know you got to put the stop to that and talk about it and make sure that certain, there are certain components of it that we're going to want to be mindful of need to be withheld. And then the other thing that we see a lot of is the law enforcement records, and I know you deal with this all the time, Chief, and that's actually been an area that's been in flux. The law has changed back and forth in the last few years about this. There are certain things that you have to provide, and it's fairly general in the code section, and I've even put the code section references in there if you're so curious that you want to look. But criminal incident information, a general description of the criminal activity reported, the date of the crime, the general location, the identity of the investigating officer, a general description of any injuries or damage or stolen property. A lot of that may be reflected in a CAD sheet, for example. Mug shots, adult arrestee information is you have to disclose, and completed unattended death investigations is something they've got carved out specifically. But anything beyond that generally falls into the discretionary category. There are criminal investigative files which include a vast array of information, much more detailed than the general information that you must disclose. Photographs, body cam footage, court orders, criminal complaints, specific things that identify victims, identify sources, identify witnesses. Those types of things are generally discretionary. And sometimes, if you are going to identify or disclose police techniques, or if you're going to disclose witnesses or confidential informants or victims, you can't disclose them. So again, there's been some back and forth in the General Assembly as the General Assembly's gone through some changes over what law enforcement records are disclosable and which ones may be withheld. And there's the latest changes created these new categories where you have to give certain people notice. Like I have to give notice to a victim if I'm going to disclose this information and give them an opportunity to respond, or to somebody's attorney if we're going to disclose this information. So it's been in flux recently, and it's the kind of thing, if you get one that you're not sure about, it's an opportunity to reach out and just make sure that you're going in the right direction. Okay, I'm going to move through and do public meetings real quick. Remember, two main parts of FOIA, public records and public meetings. This you are all very familiar with. Anytime 3 or more members of you get together and want to talk about public business, you need to notice it as a public meeting. This also applies to committees. I think if you have a committee of 2, that's where that rule changes. If you have created a specific committee to carry out business on behalf of the council and it only has 2 people, that as a formal committee would have to also go through the same notice procedures and minutes and public meeting processes that the full body would have to go through. Of course, you have to provide the notice and you have to take minutes. Agenda packets and agendas have to be disseminated. It has to go to the media and to the public and be available to the public at the same time it's made available to town council, so that the public has the same opportunity as council to know what's on the agenda. Your meetings must be in ADA accessible space, and the media must be permitted in, and obviously the opportunity to record or take photographs must be allowed as well. The notice must state the date, time, and location of the meeting, must be posted at least 3 days before the meeting. We were talking before about a desire to maybe move to an electronic billboard out front, which I think is a great idea. We still are going to have to figure out a way to leave up the notice so that people, if we're having notices posted on the electronic screen, so that people can still see the notice, and so that we're still in compliance with that provision of the Freedom of Information Act. You need to put the notice on the website, and that's, you see in a prominent location. That typically is the bulletin board out there and at the clerk's or town manager's office as well. If you have an emergency special meeting or called meeting, you have to provide reasonable notice. You try to do at least 2 or 3 days. There can be obviously emergencies where you have to meet on shorter notice than that. And that's why the law looks to see what's reasonable under the circumstances. While the rule of thumb is 3 days, there are some meetings that require more than 3 days. If you're going to sell real estate, or if you're going to consider zoning action, or if you're going to you deal with tax rates and budgets, you're going to have different advertising and notice requirements. And it's just good to be mindful that there are those circumstances when you have specialized actions that council is going to consider that you want to be aware of the additional notice provisions. So we have these meetings, and we invite people to come and speak at the meetings, and this is, I think, important. And Mayor, you're very good every meeting about talking about the ground rules and the guidelines for people if they want to come speak. This is what we call a limited public forum. And so when we invite citizens to come up, whether it's a citizen's comment period or whether it's to comment during a public hearing, it's not a complete open public forum. It is a limited public forum, which means we can establish guidelines and rules for citizens to follow. We can put a timeline on them. We can no ad hominem attacks, direct your comments to the body as a whole, not to individual members of council. And by putting those rules, we try to maintain some level of decorum and control over the process. We haven't had anything too heated here of late, but there can be times when you get heated public comment during some more cantankerous times. Cat licenses and hunting restrictions, I'm telling you, you'd be surprised.
RVs.
RVs, okay. Closed meetings, we go into closed meetings occasionally. Closed meetings, you'll see when we talk about some of the reasons that they mirror in many respects the same types of records that are exempt. But you have to have, again, statutes liberally construed to favor open meetings, so you have to have a specific exemption. And then when you go into closed meeting, you have to state not only the code section, but we also have to state what we're going in to talk about. So it's not sufficient to be general and say we're going in to talk about personnel, that general. You need to be a little bit more specific, and we're going to go in and discuss the performance of an administrative staff member. So it gives you a little bit more tie-in to what is being discussed. Or we're going to go in to discuss the possible sale of property in downtown Vinton, something that hones it in a little bit more than just a generic citation to the code section. And then once you get into the closed session, you can only discuss those matters that are included in the motion and proper under the statute. So you want your motion before you go into closed session to make sure you've included the issues you want to discuss, so that when you're back there, you're not in a situation where you're saying, well, now that we're back here, we came in under this, but we'd also like to talk about that. What I usually advise people in that instance is, let's finish this up, let's go back out, do another motion, then come back in. That's the way to, so there's a fix in that situation, but to maintain compliance, that's what you would have to do. And you can invite non-members back. And obviously the two people who go mostly to a closed meeting would be Pete or me. But if you have an economic development prospect or something, there may be a reason to bring in an engineer or something like that to give some explanation as to the project. You look like you have a question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry.
I just want to confirm, so in the initial request for a closed session, you can include more than one?
Oh, yes, you can include a bunch of things in your motion. We can go into closed meeting under 2.23711A1 to discuss the performance of the town manager, and 3711A7 to discuss probable litigation with the town attorney. You can do that all in one motion, and then we can talk about everything back there that's covered in that single motion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I have seen some bodies do it differently, but I don't think you need to. I think the code provides you enough flexibility there. Some of the issues, again, personnel, like we just talked about, consultation with legal counsel, economic development projects. So you can go in and talk about economic development projects, because if the body would like to discuss, again, what kind of incentives would we be willing to offer an economic development prospect? And you don't want to do that in an open meeting because you're communicating that to the prospect. So you need to be able to go into a closed meeting for that purpose. Same for investment of public funds where competition or bargaining is involved, or contracts where such bargaining is involved. Again, you're looking to procure a certain service, you've got an RFP out there, and you've got a couple competing ventures, there could be a circumstance when you would go in and discuss what circumstances or what criteria you're looking for, what you're willing to negotiate with negotiating points. And the same with real estate. Go in and discuss what you're willing to pay for real estate or what you're willing to take if you're selling real estate. You can have those conversations in a closed meeting. Of course, you cannot take action in a closed meeting, and you all know this. At the end of a closed meeting, if you want to take action, you have to come back out and then take the action once you're reconvened in an open meeting. Of course, when you come out of that closed meeting, there is the certification requirement. And that is, so on the front end, we go in, we say why we're going in, and then on the back end, we come out and we have to certify that while we were in the closed meeting, we only talked about things addressed in the motion and that were proper under the code. And that's the certification vote we take at the end, which it says it's got to be a recorded vote, and everybody as a practice does that as a roll call vote to make sure that everybody's on board. If for some reason, and I've had this happen once in my career, some reason somebody disagreed, the obligation is for that person to state why they voted no on the certification.
Oh.
It's an interesting time.
Yeah, I'll bet.
I bet so.
FOIA is enforced civilly. Again, we mentioned COIA, the Conflicts of Interest Act, that's enforced criminally. FOIA is enforced civilly. Somebody who makes a FOIA request or a citizen who believes you shouldn't have gone into a closed meeting can file suit and seek civil damages, mostly the form of a penalty, as you see. There could be injunctive relief as well. I asked for certain documents. The town refused to give them to me. So I'm going to file suit and ask the court to order you to give me the documents. I think you're going into closed meetings for reasons you should not be going into closed meetings for, so I'm going to sue and ask the court and join you from going into closed meetings for that purpose in the future. That's how the civil FOIA litigation tends to bear out. Just a quick blurb on electronic meetings. The electronic meetings, of course, we were all scrambling during COVID to try to navigate through electronic meetings because the code really didn't do a very good job of dealing with that situation. The General Assembly has now, hopefully we'll never need it, but they've now put in place a mechanism where if there's either a state or a local declared emergency, we can meet virtually to carry out the business of the town. Before, we had to cobble together a bunch of different code sections and hope in a prayer and think that nobody was going to challenge us. And that's pretty much everybody around the state was doing the same thing. But now there is an express code section that allows it. There is also a code section in the absence of, well, let me back up. In the absence of an emergency, then we must have a quorum present in one physical location to have a meeting. There is a code section now that allows for occasional remote participation by an individual member in a meeting. So if, for example, the quorum was physically present and one individual could not be here, sick, caring for a family member, away on vacation perhaps even, then you may be able to Zoom in or phone in to participate in the meeting. There are some requirements that go along with that. The first of which is to adopt a policy up front that permits it. And but if you do that, then that would be an option for people if they were not here and wanted to call in. And I know I've got a lot of bullets on there, but if the member has a personal matter that prevents their attendance, the vacation scenario, for example, you can only do that twice a year, so you can't use it as an out from coming to all your meetings. It's limited on how often you can do it. The code is a little more forgiving if you have a medical condition or a disability that prevents you from coming. And the way that happens under the policy is ultimately the other members have to vote to approve the absent member's participation. You have to apply the same standards. You can't treat people differently. So if you would do it for one, you have to do it for the other. But it does give you an opportunity to push back if somebody were taking advantage of the situation, for example. Training. There is a FOIA Advisory Council, much like we talked about Conflicts of Interest Act again, and their online training webinars. There are some options from the Governor's FOIA Advisory Council for additional training. They also provide training for FOIA officers. Obviously, if anybody has any individual questions about meetings or public record, you're more than welcome to give me a call, and we can walk through particular issues. FOIA is one of those things. FOIA, you can at least give some overview of and some rules of the road that people can live by. There are always going to be specific questions that come up in the context of meetings or record requests that need some explanation of the facts. The Conflicts of Interest Act is a little different. I mean, it is so fact intensive. It's hard to do a real good comprehensive training that doesn't really look at fact scenarios. But that's what I've got. Questions? Anyone?
Just one, I'm sorry, and
You're fine.
after all these years, I should know.
Well, and it changes too. There have actually been quite a few changes in FOIA over the last few years.
So the slide that said common FOIA exclusions, working papers of the town manager.
Yes, sir.
So could anyone else's records be excluded?
It is the chief administrative officer is the way the code section is worded, I believe, which would be town manager, city manager, county administrator.
Okay.
I will check and see if it might extend to the mayor. I don't think it does not extend to every individual member of council, and it certainly doesn't extend to other employees. It might apply to a mayor, and I'll check that and see, but my recollection as I sit here is it's just for the chief administrative officer of the organization.
Thank you. Okay.
Well,
Very
thank you all for
good.
staying awake.
No,
That was good.
it was interesting.
You're a good teacher.
Yes, you are. It was very good. Thank you, Jared. All right, and with that, but seriously, Jeremy, that was very interesting, actually, important stuff, so thank you. With that, we'll move on to items that require action, and Andrew, I understand you got a couple of things for us?
I do, yes, sir. All right. Good evening, Mayor and members of council. So every year, we as a town, you all as a council, write off 5-year-old debts that pertain to water and sewer that are deemed to be uncollectible. We go through, of course, the initial billing for that, and then 5 years of delinquent billings, as well as debt set off every year, which of course would allow those debts to be collected with any state tax returns. So that being said, there is an amount that after a 5-year period has become uncollected. The folks are unable to be tracked down to pay this. So as of the end of December 2022, the 5-year-old debts on the water and sewer accounts came to $8,602.61, and I am asking tonight that you allow us to write that off.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. So there's been a motion to approve the request to write off the debts as described by Andrew. Please call the roll. No way?
Councilmember Lyles,
Yes.
Councilmember McCarty,
Yes.
Councilmember Mullins,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stovall,
Yes.
Mayor Gross.
Yes. Did you get who made the motion in a second? I'm sorry.
I got Stovall. Was it Mullins or McCarty? Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. All right. One more time, sir.
All right, like the first one, the next one here is going to be personal property and vehicle license fees. Together, they come up to a requested write-off of $19,110.05. That is $13,235.54 of that being the vehicle license fee, and then $5,874.51 of that being the personal property tax. And again, these have gone through initial 5 years of delinquent billings and the debt set-off program, and this has been deemed unable to be collected as well.
Yeah. And Andrew, I assume we've made reasonable efforts to collect on both of these situations?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'll make a motion
All right.
to adopt.
Second.
All right. We have a motion by Councilmember Mullins, second by Councilmember McCarty. I think that's what I heard first. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Lyles,
Yes.
Councilmember McCarty,
Yes.
Councilmember Mullins,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stovall,
Yes.
Mayor Gross.
Yes.
That figure's
Resolution
pretty high, it's gotten up.
What's
Because
that?
We do this every year, right? And that's a big, seems like they usually stay a little lower than $19,000. That,
This one, the personal property and VLF fee is about 900 higher than it was last year.
okay.
So I did pull the numbers on that, so it's in the neighborhood, but did creep up a little bit as we go. I think we're probably going to see that increase at least this, as we move forward, not necessarily due to more non-payment, but as the assessment values of vehicles and things of that nature go up, that's
Yeah.
going to cause the overall expense to increase
I
as well.
see what you're saying. The figures are going to go up because the value of the vehicles go up.
Exactly. So maybe not necessarily we've got, more non-payment, but just the increased assessment value
okay.
increasing
Okay.
would increase that number.
All right, makes sense. Okay, thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
All right, Mr. Town Manager.
Yes, sir, Mayor Gross, members of council. Let's have a couple of updates for you this evening. The first update dates back to a couple of council meetings ago. Our Public Works Director, Bo Herndon, had some a presentation about the repair work done on Garthright Bridge. And there was some mentioning of the plaque that was actually on the current bridge. So we did a little investigation at council's request, and so we came up with this following information. On March 24th, 1951, resolution number 255 was a contract to construct the bridge, and it was officially built in 1952. On February 19th, 1980, by way of resolution 624, council made motion to construct the new bridge. November 2nd, 1982, Councilmember J.W. Reynolds made a motion to dedicate the bridge as Garthright Bridge and use the old original plaque. And so that's why that original plaque from 1952, it rests on the new bridge that was constructed in the early 80s. There is another plate directly over that states the date of the actual bridge construction. So it's much smaller. It's not necessarily a dedication plate. It's just an acknowledgement of when that bridge was actually constructed.
Gotcha.
Cool.
I knew it wasn't done in 1982.
It was really fascinating to go back and see the information, and it was nice. One, it was in our files,
Yeah.
and we could find it, and two,
Well, at least you still got your memory down there. You can remember things.
and two, that it was kind of nice to see how the process played out.
Yeah, very nice, very nice.
Thanks.
History lesson.
Thank you.
There you go.
There is I did issue a memo out this afternoon regarding the fire properties that were damaged in our downtown. We've been working with the owners. There's actually two primary owners involved, and then there's some secondary owners of adjacent properties that have been involved more recently. So there's been a lot of questions more recently from downtown business owners and some residents, and then a lot of actual commuters passing through our town. Seems like that uptick has been recent of folks inquiring about what the status of the fire properties are. So we've been working with the owners pretty consistently since day one. It's been just over 8 months since the fire. And it's been a complicated process, very tedious at times because of the insurance, the structural assessment of the structures themselves that have yet to be torn down. They have been determined that additional 4 addresses are going to have to come down. And then as a result of that, because of some shared walls, shared utilities, and just the close proximity, there's going to be 2 additional properties, 2 additional addresses that are going to have, in all likelihood, some damage as a result of the demolition. So there's been structural engineers, there's been general contractors, there's been demolition experts, all visit the sites, make recommendations, working with the insurance providers, because these are private properties. These are privately held ownership properties. And so the town of Vinton, Roanoke County to some degree have we have input and we have influence, but we don't own the structures. So we've been there to support them, to provide guidance, to provide assistance where possible, to help the owners navigate this difficult time. None of these people have went through it. I don't think any of our staff have been through a situation like this either. So we're just trying to be supportive and trying to guide them along the process best we can. We have had some breakthroughs in the last several months, last several weeks. That we at least have all what we anticipate the affected property owners all on the same page with their insurance companies, all understanding what the consequences of the demolition are and what the possible outcomes can be, and they're all taking their own private and personal responsibility for their own space. So those are really good signs that the progression is on the right track. We feel like that demolition is imminent for those structures. I don't have a definitive date, but I just wanted to put something out publicly from the town to kind of specify the process that we've went through and what remains yet to be done to get those properties torn down, so we can all get back to normal, the adjacent property owners, the actual property owners, to rebuild their structures and hopefully restore some businesses and even some downtown residents back to the site. So I'll continue to try to update the general public as we can, and a lot of folks are interested in that single lane closure of East Lee Avenue. It is an inconvenience for commuters, for our downtown businesses, and we understand that. But we have closed that road in for public safety reasons. While we don't have any suspicions that the building would necessarily fall on its own, there has been some debris through high winds, through freeze and thaw cycles that have become dislodged, and so that's why the sidewalk and the additional lane has been closed to provide that additional fall protection for vehicles and pedestrians. So just as soon as we can safely reopen that lane, we will certainly do so, and we'll obviously communicate that as best we can.
Well, I certainly appreciate that update. As you say, a lot of people are very curious, and obviously we're all very anxious to see that project move along, so appreciate that information.
Yes, sir. And I have one other detour to announce. We'll have some information come out tomorrow through our various media channels, social media website. But we have a new business coming to our downtown on South Pollard, 107 South Pollard, and they are getting close to opening. We don't have a specific date, but it's another restaurant coming to downtown. And as a result of their getting close to opening, they do have to make some additional utility connections. Primarily, our sanitary sewer system runs through the middle of Pollard in that block between 107 beside Twin Creeks Brewery across from R&D Coffee, just to let everybody know where we're talking about. And in order to make those utility connections to the sanitary sewer, it's about 12 to 15 feet, I believe, below grade. So it's a very deep trench. We went through this when Vineyard Station actually provided new utility connections as well. So a public works director met with the general contractor. They looked at the possibilities of when they could make this connection with the least amount of impact to, again, our businesses, our residents, and our visitors through the area. They made the determination based on the timing of everything that they would work primarily over the weekend to accomplish as much of the work as they can throughout this upcoming weekend. So the detour will actually start this coming Saturday. However, to restore the property, the road, there will be there'll be an inspection by the West Virginia Water Authority. There'll be necessary compaction of that 12 feet so that we don't have future settling and then repaving. So unfortunately, it will spill into the business week next week. We anticipate all likelihood through Wednesday of next week. We'll try to mitigate and reduce that time of road closure to the degree we can. There will be some hard road closures, and there will be some other road closures that would just prevent through traffic. You can still access a building or access the post office, but it wouldn't be allowed to be passed through traffic, for instance, during the commuting hour of AM or PM. So we'll do our best to communicate detour routes beginning tomorrow. We'll put up some message boards, and we'll just distribute the information as best we can across all channels. And we're actually going to take the extra step to visit the downtown businesses over the next 2 days to have some face-to-face contact with the downtown businesses, just as we did for the recent road closure when we had a stormwater repair on the intersection of Lee and Walnut. And so we'll just give them that extra information. What complicates this more than typical years when we've done this in the past is when we've had to close that block is because that eastbound lane of Lee Avenue is closed, it does create some sort of, somewhat of a bottleneck in that intersection of South Pollard and Lee. So the detour is going to be a little more expansive as a result of that. But we've accounted for it. I think the team's put together a good plan, and we'll start disseminating that information tomorrow.
Yeah. So I take it then you'll be using the big message board thing. Well, I'm glad we bought our own.
I would just encourage those folks that typically come through town. You'll still be able to access businesses, so the downtown is not shut down.
Right.
It will look slightly different. You might have to take an alternate route to get to your place of business or your place of employment. But for commuters, we would ask that you seek alternate routes that would go around downtown. Just limiting the number of vehicles coming through downtown, both AM and PM, would certainly help the contractors, and it would help the other businesses that are still open during that time frame. But we're going to try to limit that impact to the degree we can, but it is going to be an inconvenience, and there will be a substantial detour in place for our downtown starting this Saturday, extending all likelihood through next Wednesday.
Okay. All right.
And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Right. As I say, I'm glad we bought our own message board because we use it a lot, and we see that thing a lot recently because of improvements that's going on in town, various street repairs and a bridge repair and all kinds of things like that. And I know that means there's an inconvenience, but that's also a sign of progress, that things are happening and that things are getting done. So I would just ask our folks to bear with us through those inconveniences because that means an improvement and something advancing in town. Either that or an activity such as a parade or something was always fun. So I appreciate everyone's patience during those times. So thank you, sir, for that information. And with that, we'll move on to our committee reports. Andrew, it looks like you're going for the hat trick. For all you hockey fans.
A little hockey out there.
No, that was a good
Little
one,
hockey
man.
lingo there, yeah.
Good one.
Yes, sir, that's the plan. So we covered most of what our Finance Committee meeting on March 13th entailed in the consent agenda. So just to go back over those items quickly, we had just about $8,500 in vehicle damages. There was an initial Versa estimate and then a supplemental once I believe some of the repair started. So that was to a police vehicle that has since been taken care of and reappropriated with the consent agenda. Also, Chief Drummond works with a community group of other chiefs of police in what they call a monthly law enforcement summit meeting, and I believe they host each other in different locations, and funds are donated to whoever the host town is, the chief of police for that town, in order to fund the meeting for the town in which it will be met in. So the chief received $150 in donations that was put in as a police donation and then appropriated through the consent agenda for police donations used. So that'll be available when it's his turn to host. Also, I do have kind of a limited understanding on the tree inventory project that we talked about, but what I can tell you is this is a $10,000 grant-funded project. It is partially funded by the town. It's a $5,000 match, and it is for an inventory of folks to kind of navigate the town and see what trees that we have on certain town-owned properties and see the condition of those trees, any likelihood of hazard of those trees, and things of that nature. So the town match will likely be taken care of with some grant funds and other things of that nature, so it won't actually be new expense to the town. That will be covered. And then lastly, there was the SLAF grant, which is the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. Back in August of last year, the council appropriated the town match portion of this, and for the next council meeting, there will be a public hearing on the actual state match for this grant. And then the specific project itself will be the stream bank restoration project that is behind the Woodland Place Event Center off of Niagara. So that was spoken about in the Finance Committee meeting. Like I said, there will be a public hearing at the next meeting, and I'm sure Anita will go more in depth on the specific use of those funds and the project itself. That being said, when we go into the January financial statements, cash on hand was about $11.7 million. That is operating cash and investment funds. Collections are running very well, as they have for the entirety of the fiscal year. Our general fund cash was up about $500,000 January over December, and this is going to be mostly due to delinquent personal property billings, and then also the beginning of the business license collection. So those were coming in. Our utility fund cash also grew by $600,000, and that is going to be because of a debt reimbursement payment from the Water Authority. Again, the utility fund is going to stay open until the closure of this fiscal year in order to kind of divvy out all the various closure activities and close things out for both parties. All accounts at this point, we had talked about this in a previous meeting, but I wanted to reiterate, all of our holding accounts at this point are interest bearing, and as of today's interest rates and the current cash balances that we hold in those accounts, we can anticipate about $24,000 a month in interest generation alone, which is pretty remarkable. I think our budget for this year was $24,000. So to be able to multiply that times 12 is pretty great. So. Lastly, we had an investment discussion because of the maturity of a CD. Back in November, I talked about a 4-month CD that we had entered into with utility fund money. That was a $2 million CD at a 3.80 interest rate, and that matured last Friday on March 17th. So we had discussion at the last Finance Committee meeting on what to do with those funds going forward. So I kind of surveyed what we have and what we know of local banks to see what would be the highest and best use of those funds. And the takeaway at that point was to invest them in a money market account that was tied to the Federal Reserve's baseline interest rate. So that will be a variable rate, but it is tied to Fed activity. So the good thing about it being a money market account is those funds are accessible immediately. They're not locked up like you would find in a CD for a period of time. So they are completely liquid, and they are tied to a much higher earnings. So the exact language on the rate itself is the Fed funds minus 10 base points. So at last check, the Fed's fund was at 4.57%, so these funds are earning at 4.47%. And at this point, really all of our investment products are tied to a variable rate that's tied to that fund. So yeah, any questions on investments, cash balances, anything of that nature?
I think you do a great job with all that stuff. I'm glad you're here to keep all that straight.
Good deal. I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Good job.
Yeah.
Mayor, I just want to say, if we can, naturally the valid point behind the 24, the percentage and us grossing or netting around $24,000 a month. The process that we use is, as we very well know, is a vigorous process. We go to a lot of lending institutions. Those lending institutions have the opportunity to submit what they would like to do for us, And of course, it's our job as the committee to pick the, what we feel is the best method for us to spend the taxpayers' dollars wisely. And I take my hat off to the staff, because I've always said that, you know, in organizations, really the finance person can be the most important person for this. But as we've said into finance, and to let the rest of council know, I am a firm believer that the citizens give us a job, and that job is to manage their money well and be good stewards.
Yes,
And I get it. We know the cash, you know, we have cash on hand and no debt, and all that sounds good. But, you know, also, what are you doing with the revenues that you're making? And I can honestly say that, you know, it's a great process. It's a vetted process. It's not just, you know, we go to the local bank, knock on the door, and tell them we got some money we want them to put in the money market. But it's a vetted process, and it works well for the citizens. So I take my hat off to you folks for doing that.
Yeah. I appreciate those comments, Mike, and I certainly agree. I think our finance director and our assistant town manager have done a good job. Well, they've done a great job. They keep us on the finance committee informed, and we certainly want all of council to be informed. So, yeah, I think the money is being managed quite well.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Mayor, before we move forward, I wanted to go ahead and request that you all approve the financial statements for not only the January that I just reported on, but also the previous periods of December and November of 2022.
Great. Thank you. Well, Council, you just heard the request for approval of the financial statements.
I make a motion to approve.
All right.
I'll second.
All right, motion by Councilmember Lyles, second by Councilmember McCarty. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Lyles?
Yes.
Councilmember McCarty?
Yes.
Councilmember Mullins?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Stovall?
Yes.
Mayor Gross?
Yes. All right, thank you, sir. And with that, we'll move on to the Public Works Committee report. Mo, all yours. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you. Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. March 15th, we had our Public Works Committee meeting. We talked about 7 topics. First topic we talked about was our signal lights. Of course, you know, over the last year and a half, we've been trying to make some improvements. So as of today, well, as of the 15th, all our GPS timers have been installed in all our cabinets. All our pre-dimps for the rescue vehicles have been installed and wired up, so everything is moving through on a timely manner. I've seen a big improvement. We're still trying to put some numbers together to see how good we did during this process, but I know that you can get from PFG to Bypass Road in Washington in 3 minutes.
Wow.
So
That's
How
great.
fast do you go? No, I'm just kidding.
29 miles an hour.
Don't answer that.
It's hard to say. Actually, that's going up Washington Avenue, not Washington Avenue, but going up Virginia and Hardy is probably the hardest road in probably the state to speed on.
No kidding.
Second thing we talked about with Carfreight Bridge, that project is completed. Of course, you noticed that from all the traffic control being gone. That project it delayed about 30 days, but it was a good job. The expansion joints were put in and sealed up correctly. So turned out to be a good project.
Yeah, great.
Third thing we talked about was the Cleveland water line project that's going on. As of Friday, since the last time I talked to them, they have put in 940 feet out of 1,700 and have connected 7 services.
Wow.
That project is still scheduled to wrap up sometime at the end of April.
Okay.
Fourth thing we talked about was Glow Fiber. Glow Fiber is still in the town. It's still being installed and still on schedule to be completed and done with by midsummer. And from what I understand, the fiber that has been put in, you can call Glow Fiber up and request your service, and it will run.
Oh, so it's in operation.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Oh, wow.
Fifth thing we talked about, I don't know if anybody's noticed, the new street lights along Gusnick's and Washington. So we went from town line to town line and installed all LED lights. Was slated to be midsummer to fall for that to happen. They called us on the week and said, we got all the lights, we got 4 crews, and I need 2 days. So
Help yourself.
we gave them the 13th and the 14th, and they was done.
Oh, man.
Looks so that's a big improvement.
It looks really good.
It looks
Yeah,
good.
it does.
Yeah, they do. Yep.
Sixth thing that we talked about was some of our stormwater projects. For about 3 weeks, we had the intersection of Walnut and Lee closed. That was a pipe that we found that was getting ready to collapse, and was also looking at that pipe when that pipe's going to go in within the new parking lot that we've talked about behind the farmers market. So we wanted to go ahead and get that knocked out, and before the season started, between car shows and farmers market and festivals and things. So that took us about 3 weeks. Only major thing we probably have to do is repaint the Vinton sign in the street, which we're going to have to do that anyway. So, but that's done. And we got about 4 more projects that we're looking at. East Cleveland, we're looking at putting a East Cleveland, we're looking at putting a French drain there at the end on that one side, just to ensure the water stays out of the road. That gutter pan on that north side of the road stays a little damp. Don't know why. It's no water coming up through the road that we see. So we're going to go ahead and put a French drain in to just try to deviate any water that could be there or possibly there that we can't see. We have some projects on Holiday Road and that go and also follow the back side of properties on Shalon Circle. There's some drains there that's been given away, so we're going to repair them. And then also too, we're working with Thrasher Church on looking at, they have a sinkhole in their parking lot and trying to find some ways to fix their project as well. That pipe, I know from Pine Street to this past, I call it the Boy Scout building, that's back there, it's in pretty bad shape. I know what we've took out and replaced in years past before we got there, and I know how it looks when it comes out. So it's so we're trying to give them some ideas and maybe figure out some ways to help them out.
Great.
And then the fourth thing that we talked about was as refuse collection, just looking at different ways to pick up, be more efficient on picking up refuse.
Okay, great. You guys had a busy meeting. Wow, awesome. A lot going on. Well, thank you, sir. Council, you have any questions for Bob?
Yeah, I just got some, though. Like with the street lights, it's pretty cool if they just said, hey, they're here, we can do them. Are we looking at all of them throughout the town? Like, will they do like those old ones, like going up Virginia Avenue?
Yeah, we have talked to them, and supposedly if the street light is over 20 years old, they'll replace it. So I just didn't know how far they would go, so I was like, do Washington Avenue, and they was like, yeah, no problem. So then we talked about, that's when we got into the 20-year plan. If they're more than 20 years old, that they'll replace them. So we talked about doing Gusnick's Washington, which has been completed. We've also talked about doing Virginia Hardy bypass. Okay. So them main, I call that the H of the town.
Yeah.
So to get them done, and supposedly, as long as they're 20 years old, they'll do it. So.
Yeah,
the overall goal is to get the whole town done. Yeah, probably. I don't know too many streetlights that's not 20 years old.
I know, that's what I was going to say. They all look 50.
And but as long as they get them in and put them in, they'll do it. So.
Yeah, it really does brighten up things.
Yeah. We have been in conversations with them to do Virginia Hardy and then bypass.
Cool.
So.
And then, not to be greedy, but Hardy Road was really like dark, and they lit that up for us, and now one side's really bright, but the other side. Yeah.
You knew that was coming, right?
Yeah, we're replacing. Not
right there. Well, there's one at McDonald and Hardy that's probably 20 years old, but that's the only one on that side of the street.
Right.
So. No, but I will say that they added all those on Hardy Road. There was only one at Dillon Woods, and then they added every single one of them.
Yeah, we paid for them improvements there. So.
Yeah. Oh, good. How much money we got, Andrew? Cool, thanks, folks.
And then our next meeting will be set for May the 10th at 9 a.m.
Cool. Very good, very good. Any other comments, questions? Oh, great job, man. Y'all were busy.
Trying to be.
Busy folks.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, sir. Good job. All right. And with that, we'll move to the council comments for this evening. Vice Mayor, you have anything further?
Well, I do. I guess since the last time we met, the town had a birthday.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see some of the couple posts and history of the town. And of course, as Councilmember Mullins alluded to, we all went to Pokey Joe's, and I thought that was great. And I mean, what I had was fabulous. And so, and I think he's done a great job just letting people know that that they're in training. They're still in training. You make reservations until April the 4th, but they're in training, work out a couple of bugs. He's got some good people in there working with him. So I thought it was a great event.
Yeah, it was. It was good. All right. Maybe have anything this evening?
No, you took mine, so I'll just, no, I'm just kidding.
I'll take it back. Go right ahead.
Well, we had a birthday.
I'll retract what I said. Go right ahead.
No, I'm just tickled that we have all these projects going and all these new things coming out, and maybe hopefully spring will stay and the weather will be nice and all these good things can happen outside.
That would be nice, that's for sure. I think we're going to have really good attendance this year at a lot of our outdoor events because people are so anxious to get out. Sure. A couple of years being in and all those things. Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Anything, Sabrina, you have anything for me?
I do. Speaking of birthdays, I wanted to thank the town for inviting me and the March babies to a birthday lunch today that we had in here. It's kind of cool to see all the people that are in the town staff and everything that all have birthdays. I'm assuming that'll be something they do. But thank you, it was very good. And just a shout out to R&D Coffee. That's my restaurant for this 2 weeks. We was able to go down and have some good coffee and some good food. So shout out to that. And congratulations again, Pete. And I need to find out how you got the Y. So we've done that at the bank, and that would be pretty awesome to have one of those.
Sounds good.
And that's all.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Lyles.
Well, Mayor, I can show you my paper. I've got congratulations again, Pete. I've got Pokey Joe's was awesome, and I think he's doing really good. I also have the signal lights for Bo. I mean, the only thing, Clearview's a little longer now sitting there, but I understand why. You know, you can kind of, I mean, that's how I knew that, okay, they're done, because used to go to Clearview, you sit there for 10, 15 seconds, it changes just like all the other ones we're doing, and now, you know, you kind of sit there, but you can see the traffic just, you know, going all the way up through there, and it does make a big difference. I was coming home the other day, or actually today at 5 something, right at 5:15, and as soon as I passed PFG, and I went all the way up past Hardy Road, you know, and didn't no stop. So if you might, like you said, you might get stopped at one light, but you're going to go on through all the rest of them. So it's really neat how that all happens, and I noticed a big difference right off. So great job. And I got, you know, happy spring, just like someone else said, and then one thing that I do have that nobody else had was the March Madness event for the employees recognition event was really cool. It's always fun. You can tell, like, along with council that was there and staff, that all the everyone had a good time.
Yep.
So I know that been to those a few times, and it kind of brightens up their day. And or the winter, you know, we always need to do something in the winter as spring starts approaching. It's always nice to do something different, and that's a really cool thing that the town does for all the employees. So.
Yeah.
And that's about it. I think, my paper, that's the only thing different on my paper.
Well, Councilman Lyles, I know what you mean by going last, because just everything's been mentioned, and that's great. I just briefly, though, I do want to thank Corey for inviting us over. I think Pokey Joe's is going to be great. A perfect fit here in town. Fits in with our growing restaurant and entertainment section, and so I'm excited for them. The March Madness / Employee Appreciation Day you mentioned, I too wanted to mention that. It's a special day that we can express our appreciation for our staff, but I hope they know we appreciate them every day, because there's a lot of good things going on in town, a lot of things getting done, and that's because of our staff. So we get to hear all the good stuff because of our staff and the great job they're doing, you know. And just real quickly, I'll put in a plug for our car shows. We had our first one. They're the third Saturday every month, and I was quite pleased because it was a little nippy out there last Saturday, but we had a nice turnout of cars, and if you're into that sort of thing, it was a really good day. So it was a lot of fun. That's about it. Anything further to come before council this evening? Congratulations again, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I will just remind council, I will look forward to seeing you all Friday, about 8:45 for our strategic planning retreat.
Yeah. And by the way, I didn't know if anybody knew that day, that the reason that day was picked, it was going to be 79 degrees outside.
Yeah,
exactly. We're going to be inside till 5 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly.
Shorts.
Yeah, exactly right. That is an important day, and just express my appreciation to staff for putting that together, and to council for setting aside that day, because it's an important day. I certainly believe in the planning process. It has worked well for us, and we're getting to see a lot of things being completed now that we've talked about in those planning sessions for some time. So it's an exciting time. Yeah. Anything further? Congratulations once again, man. Proud of you. Yeah. If there's nothing further, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor signify by leaving. Thank you, folks. God bless you.
What's dress code for Friday?
We're doing casual, right?
What's that, Friday?
Yeah, what are we wearing?
It's 8:45. I'm being